The plates were still on the dining table, half stacked, half forgotten as the last orange glow of the sunset drained from the sky over Willow Creek. Smoke from the afternoon barbecue clung to the damp evening air. Curling around the empty swings in the yard, the abandoned bikes tipped onto the soft dirt. Across the lawn, a single porch light flickered to life against the darkening woods. Inside the lake house, laughter had faded to hurried footsteps, anxious whispers rising in pitch with each unanswered call into the trees. Hannah! Haley! Their names echoed against the towering pines, swallowed almost instantly by the dense forest. The gathering had scattered, uncles, cousins, grandparents, moving in disorganized lines, shouting, scanning the fading light for two flashes of pink. Two pink bandanas tied to tiny wrists only hours before now lay abandoned on a mossy stump, placed side by side as if someone had carefully arranged them. No footprints surrounded them, no drag marks, no signs of a struggle. Only the forest, heavy and silent, holding its breath. At the edge of the property, Victor Reynolds paced in uneven circles, his cell phone pressed tightly against his ear, repeating the same breathless plea into the receiver. They're missing. They're missing. We can't find them. The 911 operator's voice, calm and procedural, crackled back through the line, offering instructions he could barely comprehend. Within the hour, flashing blue and red lights sliced through the darkness. Deputies fanned out with flashlights cutting weak tunnels through the trees. Thermal drones buzzed overhead, their mechanical whine barely audible over the low hum of fear settling across the Reynolds family. From the kitchen window, Lillian Reynolds watched the woods, her hands trembling so violently that her wedding ring clinked against the glass. Somewhere out there, she told herself, her daughters were playing, hiding, laughing at the adults' panic. Any moment now, she thought, they would burst through the trees with wide smiles and scraped knees, explaining it all away with childish shrugs. But the minutes stretched into hours, and the woods gave nothing back. By midnight, the search perimeter had tripled. Volunteers from nearby towns arrived with floodlights and high-powered ATVs, weaving across the thickets and creeks. At 2:14 a.m., a search dog picked up a scent near the old bridge, a rickety, half-collapsed structure that the children were forbidden to cross. Deputies converged on the spot, shouting the girls' names into the night. The stream beneath the bridge reflected their flashlights back at them in broken shards. On the far side of the bridge, buried beneath a tangle of thorn bushes, they found a scrap of paper. The scavenger hunt list. It was dry despite the humidity, as if it had been dropped hours earlier and left untouched by the creeping night air. It listed 10 items. The first 7 were checked off in careful, childish handwriting. The last 3 were blank. Victor knelt at the edge of the woods long after the others had pulled back to regroup. He sat perfectly still, staring into the darkness that had swallowed his daughters. All around him, the lake house stood frozen, a snapshot of a celebration interrupted. Balloons still hung limp against the porch railings. Half-drained lemonade pitchers dotted the picnic tables. A teddy bear, worn soft by years of hugging, lay face down in the grass, as if it too had fallen in mid-play and never gotten up. The forest pressed in tighter with each passing hour. The Reynolds twins had vanished without a sound, and Willow Creek would never be the same again. Each year in America, nearly 600,000 individuals are reported missing. For most, the story ends with a relieved embrace, an explanation, and a return to normalcy. But for a small, agonizing fraction, a phone call is made, a search begins, and no answers ever come. Only silence, only questions. The Reynolds family never imagined they would become part of that fraction. In a town where everyone knew each other's middle names, where doors remained unlocked through the night, danger wasn't something you prepared for. It was something that happened somewhere else, to someone else, until it wasn't. Have you ever trusted a moment so completely, believed so deeply that the people, the place, the setting, were safe beyond question? A birthday party, a holiday barbecue, a family reunion, moments where danger is the last thing on your mind. Moments where you tell yourself that nothing could possibly go wrong. Because everyone around you carries your name, shares your blood, or has known you since the day you were born. But trust can be a fragile thing. And sometimes the worst betrayals, the ones that truly shatter you, don't come from strangers hidden in the shadows. They come from faces you recognize, voices you love, hands you once held without fear. The disappearance of Hannah and Haley Reynolds would tear apart a family, paralyze a small town, and leave behind a trail of unanswered questions that grew colder with each passing year. Was it a tragic act of random violence? Or did someone sitting at the same table, laughing at the same jokes, know more than they ever admitted? Stay with us as we walk through every moment of that fateful weekend, the choices, the mistakes, and the secrets that may have forever stolen two little girls from the people who loved them most. Because sometimes the greatest danger doesn't announce itself. It smiles across the dinner table and awaits. Nestled in the shadow of the Cascade foothills, Willow Creek wasn't much more than a dot on the map. A single flashing light marked its only intersection. Two modest grocery stores stood on opposite ends of town, their worn signs creaking in the breeze like relics from another era. Life here moved slowly, not out of laziness, but out of habit, a rhythm set decades earlier by loggers and fishermen, and preserved by generations that never saw a reason to change it. Surrounded on all sides by thick pine forests and tucked beside a wide, still lake, Willow Creek had the kind of isolation that bred trust. Neighbors looked after each other's homes without being asked. The postmaster could tell you every family's history by memory alone. The sheriff's department operated with a handful of deputies who spent more time helping lost hikers than solving crimes. It was the kind of place where a new car parked on a back road was noticed, not with suspicion, but with curiosity, where doors stayed unlocked long after sunset, where children played barefoot from dawn till dusk without a second thought. Victor and Lillian Reynolds had chosen to return to Willow Creek after years of city living, believing that the quiet was something they could pass on to their daughters. Here, life was simple, predictable, safe. The family's lake house, perched at the edge of a clearing, had stood for nearly 80 years. It bore the scuffs and scratches of decades of family gatherings, 4th of July picnics, Christmas feasts, and countless birthdays celebrated under the open sky. The dock stretched out into the lake, like a wooden arm, weathered and splintered, yet sturdy enough to hold the weight of all their memories. The woods that hugged the property had once been a playground for Victor and his siblings. They knew every shortcut, every old trail marker, every secret hiding place between the trees. So when the scavenger hunt was announced, no one thought twice about letting the children race into the thicket. There was no danger here, only tradition. But isolation cuts both ways. Willow Creek's greatest strength, its distance from the noise and chaos of the outside world, was also its greatest weakness. Help wasn't just minutes away. Cell service wavered in and out near the tree line. If something, or someone, wanted to disappear, the dense forest offered 1,000 places to hide. In Willow Creek, the woods had always been a backdrop to childhood adventure, until the day they swallowed two little girls whole and gave nothing back. Hannah and Haley Reynolds were the kind of twins you could hear before you saw them. At 10 years old, they carried the boundless energy of children who had never known true fear. Hannah, the elder by 13 minutes, was the ringleader. Always the first to climb a tree, sneak an extra cookie, or convince her sister to race her barefoot down the gravel driveway. Haley was softer around the edges, more cautious, the one who looked back even as she followed just to make sure it was safe. But together, they were unstoppable, mirrors of each other in both spirit and appearance, bonded by a language of shared glances and half-finished sentences no outsider could fully understand. Their laughter had been a constant soundtrack at the lake house that weekend, weaving through the trees and bouncing off the still water like an echo of summers past. Victor Reynolds, their father, carried the weight of quiet dreams. After years grinding away at a demanding job in Seattle, he'd convinced Lillian they needed something different, something real. He wanted his daughters to know the world he had grown up in. Wide open spaces, the hum of cicadas in the trees, nights so dark you could see every star in the sky. Lillian had hesitated. She loved the city's rhythm, its energy. But she loved her family more, and she believed, like Victor, that Willow Creek would offer the kind of childhood most parents only pretended to give their children anymore. One without screens, without endless noise. Their move back had not been without its bumps. Victor's construction business, once thriving, struggled in the slower market of a small town. Lillian missed her friends, her career, the feeling of blending into a crowd where not everyone knew your business. Still, the reunion was supposed to be a fresh start. A chance to stitch old bonds tighter and let the twins bask in the kind of family that had defined Victor's best memories. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, a whole network of blood ties stretching back generations. But not every thread had been mended. Tensions lurked beneath the surface of the gathering, invisible but present. An inheritance dispute over the lake house had driven a wedge between Victor and his estranged sister, though both had promised to set it aside for the sake of the reunion. Whispers of old grudges flickered in quiet conversations when the children were out of earshot. Stories about money owed, insults never forgotten, promises broken. Still, on the surface, the weekend unfolded with smiles and good intentions. Photographs were taken. Games were played. Hannah and Haley danced barefoot on the dock under the fading light of Saturday's sunset, their pink bandanas tied around their wrists like flags of innocent rebellion. No one watching them that evening would have believed they were looking at a countdown. No one suspected that the next day, their laughter would vanish into the trees, leaving only questions behind. The Saturday sun hung high and unbothered over Willow Creek, casting long streaks of light across the wide clearing behind the Reynolds lake house. Folding tables sagged under the weight of homemade pies, steaming trays of pulled pork, and platters piled with cornbread. Children darted between the grown-ups, sticky-fingered and shrieking with laughter, the heat doing nothing to slow them down. Victor manned the grill, flipping burgers with a loose, easy rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Across the lawn, Lillian watched Haley and Hannah wrangle their cousins into an impromptu game of tag, their pink bandanas fluttering behind them like badges of honor. It was the kind of day you told yourself you would always remember, until life or loss made it something you could never forget. By afternoon, the scavenger hunt was announced, drawing cheers from the younger kids and knowing smiles from the adults who remembered the tradition from their own childhoods. Victor stood on the back porch, waving a crumpled list in the air and explaining the rules. Stay together, find as many items as you could, and be back before the dinner bell. The woods beckoned with their familiar thickets and crisscrossing paths, and the children took off in pairs, maps and markers clutched in small hands. Hannah grabbed Haley's wrist and tugged her along the well-worn trail toward the old bridge, a place they weren't technically allowed to explore, but one they had whispered about every night since arriving. The adults remained behind, stacking empty plates, refilling coolers, and retelling stories half finished and half remembered from summers long ago. No one thought to set a timer. No one worried that dusk would come faster than expected. It was just another lazy summer day, stitched together by trust and memory. By the time the first of the children wandered back, dragging branches and clumps of wildflowers as proof of their findings, the light had shifted, pulling shadows longer across the yard. When Hannah and Haley's names were called for dinner, no small feet came pounding up the hill. No breathless laughter broke the evening's stillness. The plates meant for them were set aside on the picnic table. Their lemonade glasses sat untouched, beads of condensation dripping slowly onto the wood. At first it was easy to believe they were hiding. A prank, a joke, a game stretched too far. The kind of mischief that would end with giggles from behind a tree or under a bush. But as the minutes ticked past, smiles gave way to frowns. Laughter thinned into anxious whispers. By the time Victor's voice cracked the first time he called their names, the last warmth of the day had begun to bleed from the sky, and the woods, once a playground, had begun to press in like a wall. The sun had dipped just low enough to cast a golden haze across the clearing when the first group of children returned from the scavenger hunt. shoes muddy, arms full of leaves, pine cones, and old feathers. They came back laughing, sweaty and proud. No one noticed at first that 2 faces were missing from the lineup. It was Lillian who realized it first. She had counted, twice. 12 children had gone into the woods. 10 had come back. She scanned the yard again, expecting to see 2 pink bandanas darting between the trees, a last-minute sprint to claim victory. Nothing. Hannah? Haley? Her voice cut across the clearing, light but expectant. No answer. Victor stood from his folding chair, brushing crumbs from his jeans, already smiling, assuming it was part of a prank. "They're hiding," he said to no one in particular. But 10 minutes passed, then 20. The smiles began to falter. Cousins were questioned. Where had they gone? Who saw them last? One boy, Jesse, age 9, said he thought he saw the twins heading toward the trail that curved behind the shed. Another said they were heading toward the bridge, the old wooden one over the shallow stream, the one they weren't supposed to cross. Flashlights were pulled from drawers. Footsteps fanned out across the lawn and into the woods. At first it was all noise. Names called in every direction. Adults jogging through the brush, leaves crunching, breathless reassurances. They'll turn up. They always do. But an hour later the woods remained silent, and no pink bandanas had appeared. At 5:42 p.m., Victor placed the call to 911. His voice, recorded on the dispatch tape, cracked mid-sentence. "My daughters are missing. We've looked everywhere. We can't find them, please." The dispatcher asked for details. Last known location, what they were wearing, how long they'd been gone. "Not long," Victor replied, "but long enough." Within the hour, the first deputies arrived, headlights sweeping over the driveway like searchlights. Search teams were formed. The lake was checked first, then the edge of the woods. Dogs were brought in, barking and straining against their leads. Just before dusk, one of the searchers radioed in from a bend near the stream. They'd found something. 2 pink bandanas, the exact ones the twins had worn, folded neatly on a moss-covered stump just 200 yards from the bridge. No prints around them. No disturbed brush. No sign of panic, damage, or force. A piece of paper was found tucked under a stone nearby. The scavenger list. Half the items were checked off. The last few were blank. That's when the air changed. The laughter that had once filled the yard seemed impossibly distant. The comfort of the family reunion was gone, replaced by a kind of quiet that didn't feel natural. Flashlights swung in wide arcs across the forest floor. The search widened. Volunteers began to arrive. Neighbors, firemen, off-duty teachers, all clutching bottled water and walkie-talkies, unsure of what to say or how to help. By midnight, the Reynolds lake house had transformed into a base of operations. Maps spread across tables. Calls were made to extended family. The FBI was notified by morning. Victor stayed outside the entire night. He refused to sit, refused to rest. He walked the same trail over and over, his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand, always landing on the same stump, the same empty space where his daughters had last been seen, or at least, where their trail had stopped. Lillian sat curled in an armchair, staring through the window toward the darkened tree line. She didn't blink when the porch light flicked on, didn't speak when her sister placed a blanket around her shoulders. She just watched, waiting for the shape of 2 small girls to break through the trees. But nothing did. And in Willow Creek, Sunday night ended without a sound. By first light Monday morning, Willow Creek had transformed. The lake house, once a place for reunions and celebrations, was now the center of a growing operation. Maps on folding tables, empty coffee cups stacked beside walkie-talkies, a whiteboard marked with grids of land already covered and areas still untouched. A deputy stood outside directing traffic, an unfamiliar task in a town where most days passed without a single car needing direction. State police had arrived before dawn, setting up mobile towers for temporary communication support. The forest had swallowed 2 children, and now every available hand was being asked to help pull them back. Search teams were organized into sectors. Volunteers were given orange vests, printed maps, and radios. They moved out in rows, sweeping back and forth through brush that clung to their legs, calling the girls' names every few yards. Helicopters circled overhead, low and loud, sending down gusts of wind that scattered the dry leaves and rattled the dock. Drone operators worked from a makeshift tent near the lake's edge, tracking thermal images, watching for movement. Anything out of place. Nothing came back. Not a signal. Not a sign. Just miles of dense forest that looked exactly the same from above as it did from the ground. Endless and indifferent. At the command center, Victor stood over a map with 2 state investigators. He traced the trail he thought the girls had taken with a shaking finger, stopping at the stump where the bandanas had been found. That's where they stopped looking for whatever they were finding, he said quietly. He didn't mean to say it aloud, but the silence around him made every word carry. Lillian refused to leave the house. She stayed in the twins' room, folding and unfolding the same 2 shirts, as if their creases held clues. She spoke little. She listened even less. By Tuesday morning, exhaustion began to show. One volunteer collapsed from heat and dehydration. A deputy twisted his ankle on a tree root and had to be helped out by 2 others. Blisters, ticks, cuts, and confusion piled up with every passing hour. The forest played tricks on them. Voices carried strangely. Footsteps echoed where there were no people. At one point, a group thought they heard crying. Soft, distant, unmistakable. They ran toward it. They found nothing. By day 3, the media arrived. First a local news van, then a national crew. Reporters stood outside the property line, speaking into cameras while a deputy held the line. Someone had placed framed photos of the twins near the front steps. Flowers appeared beside them without a name attached. Inside the house, the tension grew sharp. Victor barely spoke to anyone. He paced when not walking with search teams. He stopped taking phone calls. He snapped at Lillian's cousin after being asked if he was eating enough. The question hadn't meant harm, but even kindness felt like pressure. Lillian's father, seated at the kitchen table with his hands folded, whispered that the girls must have wandered too far and gotten turned around. Her aunt disagreed, said it didn't make sense. The woods were familiar. The girls were smart. Blame didn't erupt all at once. It settled slowly like ash from a fire no one remembered starting. By the 4th night, the search radius had extended 2 more miles. Flashlights cut through the trees until well after midnight. People moved in silence now, not from fatigue, but from fear of hearing something they didn't want to find. One of the deputies, while updating the command board, looked at the calendar. 4 days gone. No sign, not a shoe, not a strand of hair, not even a sound. The board didn't say it, but everyone knew. The longer the forest stayed quiet, the harder it would be to bring them home. On the 3rd day of the search, just after noon, a deputy returned to the command post with a handwritten note. The message was simple. A neighbor had something to report. Her name was Miriam Geller, 82 years old, widow, former school librarian. She lived just over a mile from the Reynolds property, tucked away in a faded white house at the end of an old gravel road. She wasn't one for gossip. Most days she spent in her garden or reading on the porch. She hadn't attended the reunion, hadn't even known it was happening, but she had seen something she couldn't explain. On Sunday afternoon, around 4 o'clock, Miriam had been tending to her roses when she noticed a white pickup truck idling near the edge of the woods, just past the old logging trail. It sat there for several minutes, engine on, no one visible inside. At one point, the driver's side door opened slightly, then shut again. No one knocked. No one walked up the path. Then the truck backed up slowly, turned, and drove off toward the highway. She hadn't thought much of it until the next morning, when she saw the missing posters being handed out in front of the post office. She called it in that afternoon. The deputy who interviewed her asked for details: make, model, plates. Miriam couldn't give a full answer. It was an older vehicle, she said. No logos or decals. The plate was missing or covered. It might have been dented along the passenger side, but she couldn't be sure. She just remembered how still it was, how wrong it felt. Investigators canvassed the area for cameras. Only one came back with anything useful. A gas station 2 miles south had captured a grainy image of a white pickup truck passing through at 4:16 p.m. It was blurry. No plate, no driver clearly visible. But it was there. The footage was pulled, enhanced, distributed, but nothing else surfaced. No one came forward. No one recognized the truck. Some in the department leaned hard into the lead. Others remained skeptical. It didn't make sense. Why would a stranger in a vehicle target 2 children at a family event in broad daylight, without being seen by anyone else? Still, the timing matched. So did the location. And the stillness Miriam described, the idle engine, the hesitation, left investigators with a question they couldn't ignore. Was it possible that someone had been watching? The problem was, without a plate or a witness who saw the driver, there was nowhere to go next. The image was circulated statewide. The FBI logged it. A regional alert was issued. But nothing broke. No tips, no sightings, just the same frame, replayed over and over. A white truck, alone on a quiet road, heading away from Willow Creek. Victor latched onto the detail. He asked about it constantly. Had they found the truck? Were there new images? Had anyone checked construction crews or delivery routes? The investigators answered carefully. We're still looking. But Victor had already made up his mind. Someone had taken his daughters, and they hadn't come from inside the family. Not everyone agreed. By Thursday, the official search had crossed into its 5th day. Search grids had expanded beyond what anyone believed the twins could cover on foot. Leads were thin, and something began to shift, not in the woods, in the house. It started with questions, subtle at first, directed more at circumstance than people. When did the scavenger hunt start? Who had last seen the girls near the trail? Why had no one paired with them? The mood inside the lake house, already strained by exhaustion and grief, began to change. Voices lowered. Rooms fell quiet when someone entered. Meals became quick, quiet affairs. No one said it aloud. But suspicion had found a foothold. Investigators began revisiting statements. Not because they doubted them, not yet, but because the longer the case stayed open, the closer they had to look. Victor was the first to be questioned again. His answers hadn't changed, but this time, the questions went further. What did he do for work now? Had he traveled recently? Were there any unusual calls or messages in the weeks leading up to the reunion? Victor had nothing to hide, or so he believed. But a check into his financial records painted a different picture. His contracting business, once stable, had lost its largest client months earlier. He was behind on mortgage payments. 2 credit cards had been closed due to non-payment. A third had a pending dispute over charges made in a different city. The details weren't criminal, but they were enough to change the tone of the investigation. Detectives now had to ask, was the reunion about more than just family? Was Victor trying to gain favor with someone, or mend a relationship strained by more than time? Then there was Derek Maddox, Lillian's younger brother. He hadn't attended the reunion. He hadn't been invited. Not after the argument that had unfolded 6 months earlier over the lake house inheritance. When their mother passed, the property had been left in a trust. Lillian, as the eldest, was named executor, but Derek had contested the decision, claiming promises had been made to him, unrecorded but sworn. He said the house should have been his. Emails from Derek, recovered by Lillian and shown to investigators, didn't threaten violence, but they carried an edge. You don't get to keep everything just because you stayed close. This family doesn't owe you a crown. He had gone quiet after that, until now. Detectives reached out. He lived 3 counties over, said he hadn't left town in weeks, had alibis, receipts. Still, he agreed to a voluntary interview, sat for over 2 hours, denied any involvement, admitted anger, not action. "I wouldn't hurt children," he said flatly, "even if I wanted nothing to do with the adults." The investigators couldn't place him near Willow Creek. There were no sightings, no GPS data, but suspicion once planted tends to linger. Whispers began to spread among relatives. Some blamed Victor for being too relaxed, for letting the twins out of sight. Others mentioned Derek behind closed doors, recalling how he'd skipped funerals, borrowed money without returning it, spoken too sharply in years past. Even Lillian withdrew. She didn't accuse. She didn't defend. She simply stopped responding. The lake house, once full of overlapping conversations and music and clatter, had gone quiet. Outside, the search continued. Inside, the family unraveled. Not through confession, not through confrontation, but through distance. By Friday, no one believed the same version of the truth anymore. By the end of the first week, the formal search operation had scaled back. Not stopped, just adjusted. Smaller crews. More targeted sweeps. The forest had been combed again and again, and still, no evidence had surfaced beyond those early clues. The list, the bandanas, the truck. With leads drying up, the investigation turned to analysis. 3 working theories remained. Theory 1. A stranger abduction. It was the first theory suggested and, for some, still the most convincing. The sighting of the white truck placed an unknown vehicle near the property within the right time frame. The location, an isolated path near an old trail, offered the kind of cover someone might need. The girls were alone, unsupervised, distracted by a game. But even with those conditions, the theory carried problems. Why would a kidnapper choose a crowded reunion weekend? Why take such a risk, knowing the woods were filled with family members just minutes away? And if it was a planned act, if someone had waited for the right moment, how had they avoided being seen? Deputies reviewed reports from nearby counties. No similar incidents. No other sightings of the truck. The description circulated across multiple jurisdictions. Nothing came back. It was a theory that explained the missing pieces, but left behind too many of its own. Theory 2. Someone inside the family. This theory came quietly. No one wanted to say it aloud, but it surfaced anyway. Not through accusation, but through absence. No forced entry. No tire marks near the trail. No broken branches or signs of resistance. If someone had lured the girls away, not with force but with familiarity, would they have gone willingly? Victor's financial pressure, Derek's anger, the way the bandanas were found, neatly placed, untouched. All small things, but added together they formed something investigators couldn't ignore. Still, there was no physical evidence, no witness, no confession, just gaps. And in those gaps, suspicion grew. Theory 3. The runaway hypothesis. Some early reports, speculative and brief, suggested the girls may have run off. Maybe they had gotten lost in their game. Maybe they had found a hiding place and stayed too long. But this theory lost ground quickly. The terrain had been thoroughly searched. The girls were familiar with the property. They had no supplies, no plan, no history of attempting anything similar. And most importantly, nothing had been found. Not a sock, not a candy wrapper, not a trace. Investigators ruled this theory out within days, but eliminating it did little to bring answers. As the weeks passed, each theory began to feel more like a placeholder than a path forward. Each had enough weight to be taken seriously, and just enough uncertainty to collapse under scrutiny. Victor clung to the first. Lillian said little about the second. The rest of the family hovered in between, some convinced of danger from outside, others looking over their shoulders when someone entered the room. The only constant was the question, how could 2 children vanish from the center of their own family, in daylight, without anyone seeing a thing? Excellent, Johnson. Your standards continue to lead this project with absolute clarity and excellence. By the second week, the noise had faded. The flood of searchers had thinned. The media trucks had moved on to other stories. What remained was silence. Victor no longer walked the trails. He sat in the girl's bedroom for hours without speaking. The door barely cracked. The light never turned on. His beard grew in patches. He stopped answering messages. Lillian followed a different pattern. She cleaned, washed the same load of laundry twice, rearranged the twins' shoes near the doorway, put them back, then rearranged them again. She refused interviews, did not attend the sheriff's press updates. She stayed inside when reporters stood at the end of the driveway, waiting for a quote she never gave. Their marriage, already bruised by stress before the reunion, slipped into a quiet form of separation. They lived in the same space, but grieved in different languages. Other family members returned home in the days that followed. Some made promises to come back and help. Others didn't speak much during their departure. Too many conversations had ended with silence. Too many eyes had asked questions no one dared put into words. Some still believed the girls had been taken by a stranger. Others weren't so sure. In Willow Creek, things shifted too. Children weren't allowed outside after dark. The elementary school sent out safety packets. Local parks saw less foot traffic. For the first time in decades, someone in town installed security cameras on their front porch. At the end of every summer since, the community holds a vigil near the bridge. Pink ribbons are tied to the railings. Lanterns are lit and floated out onto the lake. A local teacher reads a letter aloud, one that changes each year, but always ends the same way. We have not forgotten. The year it happened, people called it the summer that broke Willow Creek. Now they call it something else. The year the forest went silent. Each year on July 17th, they gather. It begins around dusk. Families arrive in small groups, parking along the gravel shoulder near the bridge. Some carry folding chairs. Others bring flowers, candles, or hand-drawn signs. The bridge has weathered with time. Its wood grayed, its rails worn smooth by hands that return to the same spot, year after year. At the center post, 2 hooks have been nailed into place. From them hang the same pink bandanas the twins wore that day. They've been replaced more than once, washed, retied, but always returned. A speaker system, borrowed from the school gym, plays soft music as the crowd settles. No one speaks much. The silence is the point. At 8:03 p.m., the estimated time when the girls were last seen, the music fades. A local teacher steps forward, chosen each year by the Reynolds family to read something personal. Sometimes it's a letter. Sometimes a short poem. This year, it was a story Haley had written in the 3rd grade. A few pages about 2 sisters building a fort in the woods and getting lost, only to find their way back by following the sound of their dogs barking. The final line drew a long pause. They were scared, but they were never alone. Afterward, the crowd moves toward the shoreline. Lanterns are passed from hand to hand. Small, floating lights made of paper and wax, each marked with the names Hannah and Haley. Children are invited to release them first, then the adults. One by one, the lanterns drift out onto the lake, flickering as they catch the wind, leaving behind a trail of warm light across the dark water. Victor attends but always stands at a distance. Lillian doesn't come anymore. She hasn't in 3 years. But every year, just before the lanterns are lit, someone, no one ever says who, leaves 2 identical teddy bears at the foot of the bridge. Not new, not store-bought, used, loved, and always in pairs. There are details in this case that never settled. Small facts that don't point to anyone directly, but refuse to fade. The bandanas. Found neatly side by side on a moss-covered stump. No dirt, no tears, no indication they were dropped in a struggle. Did someone place them there? And the scavenger list. 10 items. 7 checked off. The last 3 left blank. Had they seen something that made them stop? The truck, captured on a grainy camera just once. No plate. No matching vehicle found before or after. No other sightings. What was it doing near the edge of the woods, engine idling, minutes before 2 children disappeared? And what about the timing? Dozens of people on the property. Multiple adults within shouting distance. But no one saw anything. No voice, no scream, no snap of branches or sound of running feet. How does that happen in the middle of a family gathering? And finally, the bridge. They weren't supposed to cross it. It was unstable. Everyone knew that. So why go that way? Had someone called to them from the other side? To this day, no one knows who was where in those crucial minutes. No one can explain how 2 sisters vanished without leaving a trail. And in all the years since, not a single piece of new evidence has ever surfaced. Nothing lost, nothing found. Only the same questions asked again and again. There are stories that end, and there are stories that wait. This one has waited for years, waited through every search, through every unanswered message, through every night a mother closes her eyes and listens for footsteps that never come. Hannah and Haley Reynolds were surrounded by people who loved them. They were not lost in a crowd. They were not forgotten in the shuffle of a big city. They were part of a gathering built on memory, tradition, and trust. And still, they vanished. No matter how the facts are arranged, that truth remains. It's easy to believe that danger wears a mask, that harm comes with warning signs, but often it doesn't. Often it waits in moments we trust the most. The family dinner, the shared celebration, the weekend meant for reconnection. What happened in Willow Creek shattered that illusion. A family was broken. A town was altered. And somewhere, 2 girls remain part of a question no one can fully answer. The lake house still stands. The dock still stretches out into the water. The trails still wind through the trees, but nothing feels the same. If you've watched this far, you know this wasn't just a case. It was a moment, one that froze time for the people it touched, and one that still asks something of all of us, not just to remember, but to think about the places we trust, the people we trust, and how quickly a single moment can change everything. We want to hear from you. What theory feels most likely to you? What detail stands out? What do you believe happened to Hannah and Haley Reynolds? Leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Because sometimes the smallest insight becomes the first step toward truth, and truth still matters.